like years back, probably 5 years ago, it was Christmas. I'm like, what do you want to do for Christmas? I was thinking, I mean, as much as I like to help people, I was like, let's go get an Airbnb somewhere, and Josiah said, I really just want to feed the homeless and not like go to a soup kitchen. He bought all the food, made all the food, not traditional. He made like jerk chicken. He loved to cook. And we made all this food and we went into the town, actually where we are now. We're in the north side of Arcata. And we went out onto the plaza. That's where a lot of the homeless hang out. And we fed them his home cooked food, hot food on Christmas. That's what he wanted to do.
Welcome to this episode of War Cry Podcast. We are an all-Native-run podcast discussing data, events, stories, issues, and historical connections about Northwest's missing and murdered Natives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. My name is Emily Washings, and co-hosts today are Patsy Whitefoot, Robin Peebushy, and Lucy Smartlout. For announcements, we just want to acknowledge everybody that's going through fires right now. We have fires throughout the Northwest, including our guest who had to evacuate her home. So she is interviewing in a safe place right now, but our thoughts are with her and everybody else. Additionally, we still are in a time of pandemic. So everybody that's impacted by coronavirus or taking all these extreme measures, including, teaching your kids at home, our thoughts are with you as well.
Today we have Liz Hilderbrand. Thank you for joining us. I'll be reading a short summary of her son's case. On Friday, June 7th, 2019, Josiah Joe Hilderbrand, 25, and his friend John Cleary left the San Francisco area in a light blue 2004 Honda Civic Hybrid to begin their road trip to George, Washington. Both Joe and John were Grateful Dead fans and were on their way to see Dead & Company, a concert that featured former members of the Grateful Dead that were performing. This road trip would take them about 13 and a half hours to make it just in time to see Dead & Company perform on Saturday, June 8th at the George Amphitheater. Little did they know that Friday, June 7th would be the last day anyone would hear from them. By Tuesday, June 11, Josiah's mom, Liz, had not heard from Josiah, as he wasn't returning any texts or calls. John's friend also reported not hearing from him since the day they left. On Friday, June 14th, news that Cleary's light blue 2004 Honda Civic was found abandoned, partially burned with traces of blood, was found just outside Wapato, Washington in an orchard. It was at this time that Liz contacted the Yakima County Sheriff's Office to inform them that her son Josiah was also with John. And for our listeners, Wapato is approximately 84 miles from the George Amphitheater in George, Washington. Sunday, June 23rd, Liz had decided to create the Help Bring Josiah Home Facebook page. Knowing that Facebook could reach multiple audiences, she had hope that it would aid in the search for Josiah. By the end of June, Liz was officially informed that the FBI would be taking the lead on this investigation. 6 months after the car was found in January 2020, the DNA results confirmed the blood from the car was a match to Josiah. The whereabouts of John and Josiah at this time were still unknown, although various news articles had reported that evidence pointed to possible homicide. It wasn't until August 5th, 2020, that two sets of remains were found by construction workers on the highway south of Toppenish, Washington. Through dental records, confirmations by September 21st, 2020, Josiah Hilderbrand and John Cleary were finally found. This whole time, Josiah's mother, Liz, had created a large social media presence in hopes of aiding and building awareness of her son's case. All while living states away from the scene, Liz had built a community of local and national people who shared and gave thoughts of love and support to Liz and Josiah's family. On this page, she shares not only information about her journey, but thoughts along the way as a mother and an advocate. On September 3rd, 2020, a memorial cross was set up near where John and Josiah were found, donated by local community members and members of the Yakima Nation, who held a small ceremony for Josiah and John. We want to acknowledge that this is still an open investigation and that there are aspects of the case that Liz is not at liberty to speak of. The manner of death of Cleary and Hilderbrand is considered a homicide, and the cause of death remains under investigation by the FBI. So please, those with any information, please contact and call the FBI's Yakima Field Office, 509-453-4859 or 1-800-248-9980. Tips can be submitted to tips.fbi.gov.
So, Liz, being in an online public search is such an emotional process. And I really want to have somebody that's also been in a process and searching for a loved one ask our first question today with you and kind of dialogue. So Patsy, I'll turn it to you.
Okay. Thank you, Emily and Robin, and welcome, Liz, to our podcast today. Appreciate you making the time to be with us. So for me, as an educator, longtime educator here around the Yakima Reservation and, at the state level as well, I always want to know about the person, it's just like, learning about the students that are part of your classroom. And so if you would share about your son's personal character and career goals in life, I think that would be helpful. We want to know I want to know who he was. It's important to know who he was and his aspirations that he had in his life for himself, his family, and his community. Please share with us.
Well, thank you, Patsy. Josiah was, I think it's important to me to just say that he was my only child. I was a single mother, and we had an incredibly tight bond. We went through a lot together, a lot of changes. I had him very young, so we also grew up together. As a young boy, he was raised in the mountains, in nature, and he was really drawn to nature. He loved to fish. He loved to swim. He was also very adventurous and liked to build things and climb trees. And to me, everything like normal little boys do. Not so much today, but we lived a very country life, big garden, very helpful, sweet little boy. I often heard from different parents that they wanted to have Josiah. Josiah would go to friends' houses to play, and he would come home with their parents saying, we'd like to have Josiah over more often. We think he's a good influence on our kids. He had a very soft and gentle heart, even though he was very boyish. As he grew up, he definitely had a love for music and loved to build things, loved to create, was really into Legos growing up. There's, I think, from probably about, he was even played with the big giant ones as a baby, but from about 3 on, when he's creating lists, that's all he ever wanted. Legos, birthdays, Christmas, everything. And in school, he was an independent learner. He did actually struggle with classic structured schooling. He was a good independent learner, very intelligent, but also struggled with testing and that kind of stuff. But eventually made his way in. From 10th grade on, he was in an independent high school, still county run, state run, but it was for kids who didn't quite fit in with the regular structured school. And he was allowed to go at his own pace and then also do things like wood shop and ceramics, and really excelled there and got really good grades and moved through very quickly once he was allowed to do it in his own way. So he always had his own way of doing things. He was an independent thinker, very intelligent. He had, I have a little picture of him here, so if I keep looking away, it's because I'm looking at him. He had a real thirst for information and a mind like an elephant. And when he got interested in something and researched it, he was always just so informative and inquisitive, and he was just a really amazing person to speak to. Loved to garden, farming, outdoors. The most recent thing was when he got out of high school, he didn't have a desire he was finished with school, didn't have a desire to seek higher education, which was totally fine with me, and had a desire to go into fire for quite a few years. He was able, so I could get my timeline straight. He went missing in 2019. In the winter of 2019, he moved home with me, which was the first time in 6 years that he had been home, 7 years. At that time, he got a job. We had a little mom and pop mill in our community. He got a job at the mill, and it was very kind of family-oriented environment. Everybody took care of each other, went fishing outside of work and that kind of thing. Also got involved in our local volunteer fire company, who provided funding, for him to go to the Mendocino County Fire Academy. They paid for that, which when he finished with the academy, he would have gone on to then be a member of the fire company and then be able to fight fire. He told me, that I remember him saying, he was talking about the fighting fire, Mom, I really want to do this. And he said, I just can't imagine any greater job in life than being able to help other people. At the same time, I'll say that my son did struggled with kind of finding his way. He was a late bloomer. He went through, I had sleepless nights, but his heart was always in a good place. And I felt like, that given time, he would, find his way back and be able to fulfill these things. So he only finished part of the fire academy, and it was his intention last year to fire academies in the winter. So it was his intention to, during the winter, finish fire academy. And then with all of these big fires that are going on right now, that's what he would be doing. And it's kind of, I don't really like the word coincidence because I don't know about that, but to me, I definitely have been thinking about him with all the fires that have been raging. Now I've been talking to him, that, oh, this is what you would be doing now. And he really wanted to have children, Ugh. He was really looking forward to having children and was so gentle with little kids. And I think he felt safe with them, and animals too, and I still have 2 dogs that both came through him. They were our dogs and he was their papa. And that's how they knew him, is by that word. And they're all sleeping now, but I don't say that word around them because they get excited. They go looking for him, but a big-hearted person, very big-hearted and gentle. So people that were fortunate enough to cross paths with him, I have not heard anybody have a cross word about him, honestly, anyone. And like I said, it doesn't mean that he was perfect. He was not perfect. He struggled, but just very kind-hearted individual.
Thank you. Your words about him, about your son, that his heart was in the right place. I think for the individuals that we have here around our area, similarly, families would say our family members' hearts in the right place. They have big hearts, and I really appreciate that because in my case, I've had my sister who's been missing for years and cousins who've been murdered as well and haven't been solved. For years, and so you always want to have the best thoughts that you can for your loved ones, and really appreciate that and appreciate your sharing with us about your son.
So my next question for you, Liz, is a little bit more about yourself and how you have taken care of yourself during this time since you had found out that Josiah was missing. What have you been doing for self-care? What has helped you cope through some of the more strenuous times that you've had to work through?
I would say, so I have been caring for myself since the beginning. I would say only more recently did it develop into something that I would describe as conscious self-care. In the beginning, oh gosh, to think back to that time, it was so crazy. It was like a movie. It was not real, but I really accepted that I was in it. And I really switched into survival mode. And that's what has been described to me, because I was describing, so I have a therapist. So that's one thing I'm doing. I found out, I got the call So what had happened was my son was actually looking for a ride to go to that concert. He did not have specific plans with John to go. He was looking for a ride. He was on his Facebook trying to find a ride. And this band is one that people travel to go see. So, is anybody going? Can I get a ride? And he was frustrated he couldn't find a ride. Then he found a ride. And at the last minute, the ride fell through. And so he expressed frustration about that falling through. And he got the ride with John without anybody knowing about it. On that trip, John had taken a selfie of the two of them and passed that selfie around, or just sent it to a friend. And then when this news came up and people knew about John, or at least something had happened, not specifically what, they were passing that photo around. And eventually it got to a friend who recognized Josiah, and she got in touch with me. So that's why it took a week. It was June 7th, which was a Friday, to the following Friday. I'll never forget where I was, when I got that message asking me to urgently call. And I called, and she was near hysterical that something happened and so on. And so I started calling all the appropriate people to figure out what was going on, try to track down exactly where is this and so forth. When that happened, when I say I was speechless, it was like on every level, like the entire world stopped and I just froze. And issues came up for me that I can only identify now as honestly shame. That, oh no, all of a sudden I'm going to be in the public eye. People are going to be looking at me. What are people going to think? And it wasn't a real direct thought that way, but it froze me in a point where I really couldn't take action. I just kind of stalled. And I think there was another aspect that I was hoping that it was just going to go away. It wasn't real. On the Friday, so I'm responding to this, I actually calmly called the members of my family and I said, look, this is what's going on. This is what I am doing about it. I sensed that I needed to reach out to the public, but I was terrified because I knew when I did that, it was all going to begin. There's the possible loss of my child and what has happened to him. Is he still alive? And then the whole social media campaign, media in general, the things that we hear about people looking poorly or the media swooping in and getting the big story and all this. And so on Saturday, I met a friend for dinner. They said to me, just looked at me and said, do you think it's time to get a counselor, a grief counselor? And I reached out, before I even made the public announcement, I reached out to a grief counselor through our local hospice. And it's a community supported hospice, so they have a lot of freedom with who they help. They don't have the restrictions that the federal network or the more national network of hospice. And I had a grief counselor by Sunday that I was talking to over the phone. And I had a long conversation with her on Sunday afternoon. And she was incredibly helpful. It was also really helpful to me to just be able to dump all of this on somebody. And then I made the announcement Sunday night. So the self-care for me started then. I likened it back then to, I felt like the plane was going down. I remember kind of joking, but not joking about it, but the plane's going down and you totally ignored the flight attendant in the beginning about where the exits are. And so you're digging through the pocket, trying to find the handout and looking at it and figuring out how to get your life vest and all this stuff on. And that is what I did in the beginning. I understood the gravity of the situation for myself, how it was going to affect me, and that I needed to build my safety net in order to catch me. I did really understand that I was really in harm's way, And so I got a grief counselor early on that I met with weekly, that I called more often. Sometimes I met with her twice a week. Started getting, I'm not sure if I had started already because I also suffer from back issues, but I started getting acupuncture to help deal with those things. I talk about self-care a lot too. I think people get confused, and I do not want to discourage people from taking bubble baths, but bubble baths are not what I call self-care. I say, you can take all the bubble baths in the world, but if you get out of the bubble bath and you have a lot of negative self-talk going on, or you're unwilling to ask for help, the bubble bath's not going to help you. My thing was to find the courage within me to speak, to dump the shame. And it's such a strange thing. You'd say, well, why would you be ashamed? But fear is such a powerful motivator, and there was just so much to be afraid of. And there was so much that was confusing. And other things were this real kind of robotic. Life felt very robotic. And I was like, Liz, you need to eat. So this was the beginning of summer, the beginning of the heat. And usually I lose weight in the summer. I get the summer weight. Didn't lose weight that summer because I was like, you need to eat. I could function with the breakfast and lunch. I could not cook. I couldn't even scramble an egg because I was so frantic and there was so much going on in my mind and the anxiety and all this stuff. So then I committed to almost every night, I went out to dinner. I accepted the cost of that, because that's not something I would normally do. But it wasn't just to eat, it was commune with a friend. I would go with a close personal friend where I could just sit and be with them. Other things that I did were allowing myself to cry when I needed to cry. And that meant in public, to get comfortable with crying in front of people, to feel weepy. Those were things that I always used to kind of hide because I associated tears with my anxiety, because I've suffered from anxiety for a long time. So if I felt tears coming on, I would always choke them back, So all of these things to me were the self-care and taking supplements that would help with brain health. I had PTSD set in September, but I did not know that's what was happening to me. I knew that I was very on edge. I was actually had suicidal thoughts. I didn't want to die. I wanted it to stop. The madness was from when I woke up until I went to sleep, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I had feelings like that. And I did go to stay with a friend. I reached out for help, and I recognized that I should not be alone. I actually closed my business. I had a successful and very busy dog boarding business, that I had to make the decision to close the business, which some, difficult because of course financial, but then there was pride involved there too. I was proud of this thing. And actually, so I closed the business for just a couple of months, I thought, and I did not get better in the time that I thought I would get better. So I had to continue to do that. And I really recognized that I needed to advocate for myself. I need to take care of myself. I needed to say yes when I wanted to say yes, say no when I needed to say no, because I have been a people pleaser. I like to say yes to people. That moved on to, so I stayed with a friend for a number of months. Going home, I would have panic attacks when I went back to my house. And over time, by January, I identified that there's something really wrong here, that this is not just, when I say just grief, I am not diminishing grief because it is huge, but traumatic grief is actually, is much different than grief that we expect or can witness, or that comes even from natural causes. The thoughts about what possibly happened to our loved ones. And I found in looking into this and kind of researching this, that many people that, I would have flashbacks to what happened to him, even though I wasn't there. And I didn't even have information to build this thoughts that I would have. And they were waking flashbacks, So I then reached out I recognized that I needed to go beyond a grief counselor, that I needed more specialized. I had a more acute issue that I was dealing with. And so I found a therapist, and just in our small area, and it's one of my biggest blessings, who her background was working with families who had lost members to suicide and homicide. So she really knew what was going on with me. And I actually see her via Zoom because of COVID. I see her twice a week. I actively participate in that. This trauma has triggered old trauma. And the PTSD kind of ebbs and flows. It's actually spiked again in the last couple of weeks. And panic disorder also they diagnosed me with, so kind of chronic panic attacks. And that has returned. It's also, self-care for me is really being compassionate towards myself, of not expecting too much, and compassionate towards life. Like when you think about happiness, you know, I am happy. I have a good life. Am I happy about what happened to my son? No. Are most of my days good? Like no. Most of them are very heavy and full of sadness. But I think when I consider everything that I'm going through, that I'm doing well. And I know that that has to do with like self-love, that it's okay. It's okay that you haven't reopened your business. It's okay to talk about mental health issues when that is something that has social stigma around mental health issues. And I've had to do that for myself while advocating for him. I've had to advocate for myself because I am a victim as well. He was a victim to that crime, and I am a co-victim, and I have to treat myself that way. That was a long answer, but hopefully that's good.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you describing the different emotions and realizations that you had in that process, because I feel like at times it can be difficult for people to articulate that, especially if they don't know that's what they're experiencing. Just kind of like a side note, my ex-husband actually did go to war for 14 months and he had PTSD. And that's a different type of, scenario that we had to work through. But as a family, it was hard to see that this was happening. And how do you try to help somebody who at times didn't realize that that's what they needed, or had even felt like, they're in a space to receive that help. So I just wanted to extend my thank you, because I feel like a lot of the feelings that you had expressed are not so unusual in our community as well, especially when it comes to feelings of being alone, of being isolated, and I am so grateful to hear that you were able to have somebody that you could share space with in the evenings that could support you and be there for you. And so, in that sense, I hope that that is something that our audience does get from this, is your perseverance through this. So thank you for your words.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. I think it's really important we have to learn to ask others for help and to accept help. But I also know that anyone else can only help me as well as I am willing to help myself. I have learned so much through this about self-forgiveness. I mean, that is self-care. To look back at everything that you wish had gone differently and to be able to forgive yourself and love yourself through that. The phone calls that should have gone differently, or the decisions that were made in life, and to be able to look at myself and really see that over the course of Josiah's lifetime that I always made decisions that at the time with the information I had were the best decisions. But that is hard for me, because when you lose someone, they're gone. So this idea that there's going to be time to rectify those things, or for them to fulfill dreams that you always wanted for them, that it's over. And so then how do we process those things? And I need help. I mean, sometimes I wrote actually in one of my recent writings, or more recent, maybe it was even a month ago or so, I have such a bad idea of time. It's really blurred for me, but I had a session with my therapist where I was saying, if at all these different points in time in my life, like I was a single mother, so I had to work all the time. And so Josiah was, what we used to call growing up a latchkey kid, that he came home to an empty home many times. And if it just hadn't been that way. And if I had done this, if I had found it was important to me to find a stable father figure. And that's something that did not work out for us. And I went through this list of all these things that had gone not the way I wanted them to. And she looked at me, because we're on Zoom. She looked at me and she said, Liz, Josiah died from a senseless act of violence. And I looked at her and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, I had to be snapped out of, because our minds, which I'm also learning, and that's the other thing that's been really helpful with the therapist, that she can help explain to me what is happening inside of my mind, this struggle. It is so hard for us to conceptualize what has happened to our loved one, that we go back and we try to rewrite the past, thinking that if we did that, it would have a different outcome. Things would change. And so in doing that, we fall into self-blame and shame, and that it was somehow my fault, and it's not conscious though. It's not that I'm having conscious thoughts that like, oh, it's all my fault, because that would make more sense. I'm not thinking that way, but I go through this. So it's been really helpful for me to just have somebody who really understands what I'm going through look at me and say, Liz, stop, it's okay. Because our family and our friends, they all say, oh, it's unimaginable, which, bless their hearts, I understand it comes from a good place, but I need somebody who it is imaginable, who does understand and says, what you're saying makes complete sense to me. It's kind of like when we have a health issue and we go to our general practitioner, they say, I've never heard of this before. And then you go to the specialist and they say, I see this all the time, so that I think is really important in these different groups. And I will say one bad experience I had in January when I was figuring out that traumatic grief is different than regular grief. I tried to join, I won't call them out, but there's a national network of people who have lost their children, and they have meetings. And I tried to join a group on Facebook, desperately seeking help, because I was really suffering, and I was very excited, and I found my people, kind of thing. And I went into this group and I described just that my son, and there was a homicide investigation, he was still missing. And I was actually contacted by one of the moderators of the group, and I was asked to leave because I did not have his body. That they suggested that I join an anticipatory grief group, So like, if you know that your cat even is going to die in 6 months, that you have anticipatory grief leading up to the actual event, or somebody has cancer, that kind of thing. So I was crushing and very upsetting, but to not give up in that, and say, okay, well, you guys don't want to help me, I'm going to go look for help over here, and not to kind of feel defeated and curl up and just wish it all go away,
When we were able to speak preliminarily to this, you had said some things that really struck me, and it was about how certain emotions can give you power to do things. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, and you also talked about where that power leads and if it's useful or not. Mm-hmm. And I was hoping you could speak to that a bit, because again, kind of the relevance of why we wanted you on the show is because of the proximity to your son's case on our reservation. And again, we know that there's limitations to what you can say, but that's kind of what it is that I feel and expressed to you to this the other last night, about even our tribal membership has these emotions. They have anger, and they have things like they want some kind of closure or justice, when it comes to these cases, because your son's case, in addition to many other cases just within the last couple of months, and Emily speaks to this in a lot of our introductions to our episodes, is just within the last few months since COVID started, we've had like, what was it, like 9 you were mentioning? Just a number of different homicides, either tribal members being perpetrators or victims. And that brings up a lot of emotions, I know, for a lot of our tribal people. But again, so the part of the question is, if you could speak again to those emotions and kind of the power that it can imbue you with and what you can do with it. The second question is, I've lost a lot of relatives within the last number of years, but we think about our relatives and we think about, what would they say about this situation right now? And some of it's kind of entertaining, like my dad, like, what would he say about COVID? Like, would he believe it? Would he not? So I'm wondering, what do you think your son would have said about COVID coming up?
I have said many times he would be very frustrated. He would not be happy at all about it. I have wondered if he would fall into the group. I don't think he would believe it wasn't real, because some of that is coming up now, which is really unfortunate. And I think, interestingly enough, on the COVID topic, I feel like the trauma of losing a loved one, or the idea of people dying from COVID, kind of falls into that category of things that people can't imagine, don't want to imagine. There's so much kind of fear. They have a fear response to it. And so the fear response is to ignore that it even exists, or that idea of I may be speaking out of line, but kind of the MMIP movement. Well, I don't know anybody who's gone missing. Is this really happening? Where do they get their numbers from? And then it's the same with COVID. And I was watching COVID unfold because I was in a lot of the tribal Facebook groups in order to share information about my son's disappearance and stuff. And so I was seeing that come up in my social media feed about people losing loved ones and all this. And I was so moved by that. But he would be very frustrated by the constrictions of it, the additional stress or pressure. He did not deal with stress really well. We had so many similarities, and he was resilient in his own way, but we were different that way too. Yeah, and then now, like I was saying earlier, I have found myself, when I was evacuating yesterday, and driving up to the hotel where I'm staying, I was talking to him and saying, that he would be out fighting these fires. And I actually even thought, oh, if he was still alive, would he have lost his life in the fires, How would I feel about him being out there and being in harm's way? And oddly enough, I had the realization recently, my understanding of this is constantly unfolding. I am still very much in the midst of this journey, and I'd say probably much closer to the beginning than I even realize, even though I think it's been going on, or feel like it's been going on forever. Josiah died doing something he loved. He was on his way to do something he loved. He was excited. He was in good spirits. In the same vein, had he died fighting fire, if he was still here, he would have died doing something that he loved, But yeah, I think about this kind of stuff a lot, and I feel his presence a lot, and it's comforting. And then sometimes I don't feel him at all, and I'm like, where are you? And I notice that when I don't feel him is more when I'm very deep in grief. And I have had that explained to me, that grief is like a veil. It's very necessary, but the heavier the veil, the harder it is for our loved ones to get through to us. And I'm a spiritual person, so I do believe he still exists in spirit, but yeah, I wonder about that. I've already said, oh God, you wouldn't like this at all, Yeah. When I look back on the way that I've handled this, and when I say handled this, some of it handled, I eventually called it campaigns, that I would run a campaign, like a social media campaign. That part of it, and then also my grief, but the fallout from the grief, that our landscape changes when we lose someone close to us, especially to tragedy, because people have a hard time processing that, that people who were close to me, who I thought we were going to go through our lives together, could not handle it, and tapped out, said, this is too much for me. I can't deal with it. I had to deal with that heartbreak on top of this massive heartbreak that was going on with my child. And like I was saying earlier about, in the beginning, everything was very survival oriented. It was very methodical. It was not, I think it fell back on some of my spiritual base and that strength that I have within me. But I would feel those feelings of disappointment well up, the anger well up. And it would hit me, and it doesn't ever feel good. Anger doesn't feel good when it first hits you. It feels like poison, and I would feel it and I'd go, oh, no, don't go there. And I don't mean suppress it. Not say, oh, this doesn't exist, or not even go, well, they're trying the best that they can, because that's not always the best thing. Not in the beginning, but to focus my intention on what mattered. And so I would turn away from that and go, well, I need all of my energy focused on finding Josiah. I don't have time to deal with this. I'm going to put this off on the side and it will be dealt with later. And then as time went on, I know I wrote many times and expressed many times, I would feel this fatigue, this tiredness that was like on a cellular level. It was nothing coffee was going to fix. It was nothing sleep was going to fix, food, anything. And in those times, especially towards the end, well, it ebbed and flowed, but it definitely got much more intense towards the end, where I was saying, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Not indicating that I was going to give up, because I wasn't going to, but really like I was so tired and so discouraged. And so I would take that and I'd go, okay, well, I have to respond to this. And so I would turn that energy and I would put out one of these campaigns, and I would post in the Yakima groups. And that's one thing that I did in the beginning is, one, I found the Yakima Scan Missing Persons group, which I found a lot of support there. Washington State Missing People, I believe there's one for that too, as well as a national. And then I turned towards the tribe, to the Yakima tribal groups, because I knew that that's where my answers were. And I would run these campaigns looking for my son, and not just a missing persons piece, not just a poster. There was a reward attached to his remains being found as well, not to that, but to talk about him as a person. And I would put this thing out there with the very last bit of energy that I had, and I would throw it out into the universe, and then all of this support would come back. And when everybody, I felt like, and I believe, when everybody turned their energy and focused this energy to love and support and compassion and understanding, that energy then lifted me back up. It was almost like I was drowning, and it would push me back up so that I could breathe again and I could go on again. And I started to identify that these are the things that are helping me. This is where I'm getting my energy from. And so there's a lot of reasons, like when nothing ever good comes from anger. I'm actually an impassioned person. I have been argumentative in my life. So it's not that I'm a real pushover, but I had to get really focused on what is it that I'm trying to do here. One, for me to stay in my grief, to stay with my son in my heart, I have to keep my heart open. If I get angry and start blaming and falling down that, I leave my son, because I cannot be in the dark with that and stay with him in the light, which I know that's where he is. So a lot of it was also to honor him. I did not want to turn my back on him. And also too, why I was open about my grief and really wanted to allow my grief to flow, to fall out of me, so that I could stay with him. I think a lot of people experience grief in a way, and it's just so overwhelming and it's so heavy that we just feel like, oh, I can't think about that right now. I have stuff to do, But for me, in my thinking, I felt like if I do that, I turn my back on him. I like that. There's like a saying that is what grief is love with no place to go. And so the sadness that I felt around his loss and his disappearance and where was he was just a different way for me to experience the love that I had for him. And it's so important to me to stay with that. It's anger and just all of that, like I was saying, it's just such a dark place. And on the survival aspect of it, if I go there, my life ends, and I want my life to go on. I want to be able to continue to honor him and be the mother he knew me to be. So I think that's, really important. And I'm not sure if it's really truly a Cherokee saying, but you see it floating around on Facebook sometimes where it says, he says, grandfather, You know, that grandfather is explaining that there's inside of all of us, that there is a bad wolf and a good wolf. Is that what it is? And that they're fighting, they're warring. And he says, well, grandfather, which one wins? And he said, whichever one you feed. I really like that and identify with that, you know.
And everything that you said, Liz, I can relate to personally as well, because you have me going back and thinking about just where I was at, and I have a huge family, so everyone's at a different place.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate you sharing about those personal emotions that you've encountered and that you're continuing to work on. So one of the questions that I wanted to speak about is when you did learn that your son went missing. I'm wanting to know about I think the critical steps you took to locate him, including when he was located. There are certain steps people go through, and you've answered some of this, but I'm also wondering about kind of the legal implications of all of that. And I understand you can't answer everything about that, but just what are some of the legal steps that you took? Because I think this would be helpful for families who face similar circumstances to know about agencies, individuals who provided support in locating your loved one, or having some understanding about locating the loved one.
Well, first, to put out this, when I first put out a thing on social media saying, my son is missing, this is what he was traveling in. Has anyone seen him? And this is on June 16th. So 9 days after he went missing, but 2 days after I found out that that's what was going on. That post itself was shared over 5,000 times. So this thing started, it generated. And Robin mentioned earlier that I did start Help Bring Josiah Home. It was a Facebook page. It was a place that I felt like I could disseminate information. At that time, we didn't even know if he was still alive. I had no idea. It just vanished, Any recommendation that people gave that felt viable, I actually wound up reaching out to a satellite radio station, like Sirius radio station, where an announcement, or I was actually called in and talked to the DJ of that radio show, talking about Josiah's disappearance. So I took opportunities that came to me, getting into the Facebook groups like I talked about, especially being so far away. To be exact, I think I'm 680 miles away. And there were a lot of people saying, you should go there. And I'm like, and do what? Look where, people say, oh, we're going to go on foot. Well, then we started getting into technical issues, which is the fact that it was on the reservation. It was very important to me to respect, even in my desperation, to respect the fact that this is reservation land, beyond private land, that there are policies and laws and expectations. I did not want to get into this mode of like selfishness of, and it's funny even to use that word, because you would think in such a critical situation that all of those rules would go out the window. But I also did not want to disrespect the tribe, the Yakima people. I also didn't want to disrespect what law enforcement were asking. I did actually at one point ask people to stop searching. They actually were meeting up and starting to search where they were intervened. I had concerns about if they did find the location, that they would mess up the crime scene. So I had all of these concerns, and that I felt like it was almost vigilantism. I don't know if maybe that's kind of a little extreme, but it was really important to me to figure out the best way to facilitate him being found, facilitate the investigation, not impede the investigation. I also did not want to alienate law enforcement. It was important to me for us to have a good relationship from the start. They were the ones that were going to help my son. I was not in a position anymore to help my son. I was not close enough, any of these things. I did not understand the lay of the land, etc. So there were all of those considerations. People did speak about, there's different organizations of like I believe it's out of Texas, and I'm not going to be able to come up with any of the names, but, you know, mounted like horse people who come in and search on horseback, and it's all privately funded, you know, that you can access these resources. And I would inquire with law enforcement, oh, this idea came up, what do you think about this? And they would say, you can't do that, we can't do that. Or, you know, who from the tribe is going to escort them? And so I had to go back and, well, to some people and say, you know, thank you, but no thank you. I think it's important too to not feel like you have to answer to everybody, because that's overwhelming. You know, everybody that comes forward from the public. Also on that anger note, to, you know, turn away from the people or some of the comments. You know, people get a little crazy. You know, I've had people say, well, if it was my child, you know, that I felt personally attacked, that I was not doing enough. And I tell you, that's hard, you know, especially when you're in a pretty dire emotional state, to look over that stuff. And those were the things too, that I wasn't going to feed that. So let's see, staying in contact with law enforcement, building relationships with law enforcement, making my voice heard, being consistent. I actually set up a thing where, and it was more for myself. So my son went missing on the 7th. So I set up a thing within myself that was, if I had not heard any news, I was going to call in on around the 7th to check in and touch base. I think that so much crime happens in the world, in our country, that people are desensitized to it. When it first comes out and it's the headlines, everybody goes, wow, whoa, you know, and within a week it's over. I did not want my son to become a memory of whatever happened to that guy or those guys that came from California. What was that about again? Where was that? My son was a human being and he mattered. I felt like what happened to him negated the fact that he mattered. And when I mean mattered, I mean really mattered. So it was very important to me to keep that value of who he was as a human being. And just the fact that he was human, not, you know, a human being, he mattered. So I kept putting that towards the forefront. And that was important to me. And also in my grief, like, who was it? It was saying, I think either Robin or Lucy, or I mean, Emily was saying earlier about it being isolating. Grief is so isolating. Traumatic grief, even more isolating. Details of a case coming up that you cannot share with people, very isolating. So it was very important to me to connect with human beings in the community, because that fed me, that kept me going. And then as far as him being found, I mean, you know, you could say it was random. I don't believe it was random at all. I personally believe that God, which, you know, I'm not a religious person, very spiritual person, but what I call God placed that man there, that found him. Nobody else would have found him, I do not believe. He had a very keen eye, and something caught his eye and he decided to go check it out. Leading up to him even being found, I was starting to really hit a wall, and I was speaking to that, of how tired I was, and also that I was worried that this was growing cold, you know, and because I did a lot and I couldn't at the same time. I mean, I couldn't go out and do search parties or go knock on doors. I was also worried about people's safety, you know.
I think you hit upon some, you know, key segments of the work that you did, such as, you know, going on Facebook and communicating. You had a response of 5,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and then just continuing with your communication with, you know, others, and learning about organizations. And even though some of them may not have been productive, you at least reached out.
Mm-hmm.
And then also building that relationship with the various law enforcement that you did is important too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when families face this kind of situation, you're kind of frozen for a period of time. You don't know what to do.
Mhm.
and look at where are these resources that's supposed to help. And you're pretty much, like you said, in isolation for a period of time as well. So
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that just what you've gone through, the emotions that you shared is important for everyone to hear,
Mhm.
to know those experiences that you went through and other family members are going through as well. It's not something that we want families to face, but that's the
Mhm.
reality. I mean, we just have a
Mhm.
young girl in Yakima, 14 years old, that's missing right now, and her family's out on the media today. And so, and because I'm an educator in
Mhm.
working with schools, you know, a
Mhm.
young girl should be in school, but now she's missing.
Mhm.
So, you know, thinking about that family and where they're at,
Mhm.
we all have a responsibility to
Mhm.
continue to step forward
Mhm.
and support one another. And just your sharing with us is supporting, you know, what we need to be able to address here in this podcast.
I think really what I did in hindsight, because it was
Right.
not really intentional, is what you all are doing. It's the same thing by talking about the, you know, the MMIP movement. You take numbers, which my son was 1 and 2 with John. You take numbers and you turn them into people. You talk about the
Mhm.
people and the stories and the people affected and the communities affected by this. And if we can personalize these people and get
Mhm.
the greater public to understand that it's not just a 14-year-old girl, you know, that this is who she is and this is what she liked to do. And these are the people who are missing her. And to get people emotionally involved, because we're so detached now, you know, everything is just, and there's so much news and the headlines, and we're so just kind of inundated with all of this information that we don't connect
Mhm.
as easily heart to heart or sit in story with one another and commune that way. It's all sound bites and texting and all of this stuff. And so I think it's really important to really connect. Like I said, connect with law enforcement, but connect with people. And I think too, like, you know, with the missing persons posters, it's very important to have all the correct information on that, you know, all of the date of birth and all this stuff. But I think along with that, when we share those, that it's not just like a digital flyer that's flying past us, but that there is a story connected to that, you know.
Yeah, you know, I have been following what you've been saying online, your raw and emotional pleas for help. And, you know, when he was found, it brings me to this time, like, you know, we talked about this more in depth earlier, but I'll just summarize it. You know, about 10 miles from where your son was found, I had an accident with my siblings and my best friend.
Mhm.
And we were hit and we went down this very steep embankment. The authorities still don't know why the car stopped.
Mhm.
Now they've constructed it so there's a guardrail and different things like that. And when I was thinking about where he was found in that location, it brought me to this time, like, it brought me to this time of like thinking about who would leave somebody like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Culturally and spiritually, we have a lot of our own beliefs about
Mhm.
burials, things like
Mhm.
that. I'm not sure, you know, in your religion or culture, what comes up with that, but it's a horrific, you know, not only the horrific act of violence, but the actual act of abandonment.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I felt that so strongly when I was reading your post. It brought me to this time that was like, you know, I don't know, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And, you know, one of the first people on the scene was a woman that turned and walked away when we asked for
Mhm. Mhm.
And I hadn't talked to my family about that in 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, and they were kind of asking, like, why are you checking on the milepost? Why are you asking about, why are you
Mhm.
revisiting this? Why are you talking? And this
Mhm.
is so strongly the aspect and elements of what comes through from our community about this
Mhm.
aspect of violence.
Mhm.
We are a podcast that's focused, yeah, on Northwest missing and murdered natives.
Mhm.
But there's also this aspect of non-natives that have experienced violence on a reservation.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you can talk about a time and tell us about that time of connection. You know, I I think about, you know, you've covered this a lot already about, you know, your emotions with it, but
Mhm.
in this aspect of connection, I wonder if you can almost take me to a time when you were reading a post, I'm sure it's in your memory, in your mind. You know, when I asked my dad about this accident 20 years ago, he remembered exactly where he was at when he heard that his daughters were hit. I wonder if you can take me at a time where you read something that either a tribal member said or somebody from our community said, and you just were filled up, and you just, you know, you felt hyped up to kind of continue this work. Because I think what you're doing is essentially modeling how to be very upfront and forward for loved ones.
Well, I think, you know, a lot of what I've learned, like I was saying too, about not getting stuck in that anger, some of the stuff that so I'm a very spiritual person. I have my own conception of God. It is based on religious stuff and just other things. I am a free thinker. It has really freed me up to have a deep spiritual life and a strong connection with God, because I get to make the rules for it. And I get to live in a way that feels right to me, or, you know, I don't believe in a damning God or a punishing God. That is not comforting to me, and I need my God to comfort, you know. So I have that aspect of myself. Now I'm also understanding too, psychologically, the way that our brains work. And this is, I've always heard of left brain, right brain, but I never really understood it. And I still don't understand that much of it. But you know, the left brain is very analytical. And I have a good, clear, grounded, analytical brain. I have, and then the right brain's very emotional. Well, sometimes when I get stuck in a place of fear, or I get triggered in this PTSD type stuff, or the panic gets going, and the right side of my brain gets so flooded that my left brain, the one that's rational, can't really calm the right brain. So in the same aspect, I feel like too, oh, well, that's where all the wisdom comes, you know, because that's the part of me that I've really felt mature over my lifetime. Less reactive and all of these things. But some of the times when I get hurt or scared, I feel like a 3-year-old little girl, a 4-year-old little girl. And like you're saying about no one would help, you know, that's really the child in me, like reaching out and looking for my caregivers. And when you are hurting and people cross your path, they are a caregiver for you, you know. And so to have them turn their back on you, or like I said, very close friends who left, it's very painful. In that, it was very important to me to not paint a whole community by the actions of one or a couple or a few or whatever it was in any situation. The other way the brain works is they say, like, you can have 100 positive experiences with a dog, different dogs. One dog bites you, you're afraid of dogs. It's our survival instinct to be afraid, to learn from fear, to learn from pain, and to learn from suffering. And it takes an incredible amount of courage then to turn back to that which hurt you and give it another chance, you know. So I did get so much support, and it was very moving to me for people to open up about their own stories. Again, to not say it's unimaginable, but to say, hey, I suffered a similar experience. This is how I feel. I said earlier, you know, and I'll just say here, is that I just, in this experience, I've always loved to write. I've just now gotten the courage to say, I am a writer. It takes a lot of courage for me to say that. So I am a writer. Part of my grief process has been to write about my emotion. I get all that energy, that nervous and just sad, frustrated energy come up inside of me, and just so and express everything that I'm feeling. And so I pour it out onto paper, and that in itself is cathartic. But sharing it with other people and having other people who say, this touched me in this way. I mean, a compliment is nice. That's nice. Everybody likes compliments. But to say that my heart, which I poured on that paper or on that screen, connected with your heart, and that now we are connected, or to be asked to be on this podcast to say, we are all are experiencing similar things. How can we come together and support one another and learn from one another in this thing to help each other, lift each other up and move through this? You know, that's been huge to me. I didn't expect any of this. You know, I've always kind of felt like I was, you know, going through life and I was on my own, you know, and I had friends and everything, but I felt like if you want anything done, you're going to have to do it yourself, you know. And so to have the community come to me and embrace me. And I have to say that, you know, as a woman who identifies as Caucasian, to be embraced into Native culture is big to me. That means a lot to me. To not just say to me, hey, sorry about what happened to your son, but that's a state highway. Sorry about where it happened or whatever other implications. But to say, we see you hurting. We're going to bring you in with us. You are not alone. That saved me and continues to save me from such incredible levels of despair, you know. So, you know, it's really been, for me to say a specific incident is difficult because there's been so many. But I read everybody, like people's comments and stuff. I'm often too overwhelmed to respond. But I read and I stop and I read everyone and absorb them. And it's funny because people have this thing about social media. And I used to always say, you know, social media is like a hammer. You can use it to build houses or to smash windshields. I went to build houses. To have that, to be able to use that tool in a way that's been so positive for me and to connect me with people who really understand what I'm going through in their own way has just been, it's been incredible for me, incredibly helpful.
Is that also how Carolyn Looney connected with you in the cross?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So one correction that I'll do from the beginning of the podcast, the remains were found on, let me get my months right. The remains were found on August 5th, the remains of 2 people. Josiah was confirmed on August 12th, 1 week later. And then John, it was reported in the news that there was some issue with dental records. So he was not confirmed until September 1st. And I can actually remember Caroline Looney commented on some post somewhere on, I believe, the 14th of August. And she said, I have friends and I'm getting them to make a cross and I hope that this is okay. And then I believe she messaged me at some point, showed me the cross that had been made, but she also asserted that she did not want to place the cross until John was confirmed, which I thought was just incredibly, literally thoughtful, not just thinking of their family, but really thinking this thing out and not being hasty, you know. But to have Josiah and John included in the tribe, because all of the other crosses they've made, I had read in the article that was put out that Tammy Ayer did after the placing of that cross, that they've made 38 crosses since Memorial Day. With all the people lost to COVID, et cetera, to have them included in that, and again, embrace us and we see you in this tragedy. You are not alone in this tragedy. We want to honor you the way that we honor our own people. Was huge to me. And so I did actually get to speak with her the night before they placed the cross. We wound up speaking on the phone. Oh, what a wonderful woman. And that she's experienced loss like this, that she lost a sister, that she understands the grief and the waiting. And her sister too was missing for 14 months, another similarity. And she expressed to me that part of this would help heal her heart, you know, for what she went through with her sister. And I think that when we come together or when we can, you know, I really believe in living in service to others. And if we can live in service, like I was speaking with a friend this morning, that if me facing my fears, because I was a little nervous about doing this, if this can help somebody else, it helps heal me. So I was really moved by that and really beautiful. And they brought people from the Shaker Church that did a ceremony. And then to the skull that Brad Gowdy, I believe his name is pronounced, that he brought to recognize the deer, I hope I pronounce this correct, Yamush, is that right? Yamush? Which they
Yamash.
Asserted they've, Yamush?
Yamash.
Yamash.
Yeah.
Okay, Yamash.
You're good.
About the deer helping, to locate, because the fellow who found them was a hunter, and he liked to collect antlers and that type of thing. And that's what I mean too about that keen eye. It's not that he stumbled on them. He saw something out of the corner of his eye from far away that had the right color, and he went to check it out, But all of that, the thought that was put into that, is so moving to me, for them to be honored, but then too for our grief as their families to be honored in that way. That whole thing of, I see you, we see you, you are not invisible. We are here with you. That acknowledgement that all of us need so much, and that's back to that same thing about having somebody walk away and say, I will not help you. That is, I do not see you. I did not see you. And then to have somebody stand there and say, I see you suffering, and I am here, and I will witness your pain. I am not afraid of your pain. Is huge and empowering, with great respect to everybody's spiritual beliefs. And I would never tell anybody to go against their own framework of what they believe of how things should go. In me dealing with my grief and what I needed to do to honor my son, I was questioned over it. I wanted to have a memorial for him when his body had not been found. There were people who spoke up and said, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. Why is she doing that? I don't know why she's doing that. Where does she get that from? I did what I needed to do for healing. So that was not my intention for that memorial to be the only thing that ever happens for him. But the grief was so heavy and so thick then within my circle of friends, his circle of friends, my family, that I wanted to create an environment for all of those people to come together and to commune and hold one another, both literally and figuratively, to be in grief together and have a place for that to be held. And so I have gone against a lot of things that people say they would do differently, but you can always say too, well, you don't really know until you're in the position. But I've had to follow my heart the whole time. I've had to do what was right for me so that I could be comfortable and settled within myself as much as possible. And I think that that's really important, is to, when we go into this, to not say, oh, well, this is what people expect of me. This is what my family expects. My family doesn't want me to talk about it. My family doesn't want to do this. Or traditionally, we don't do this thing, but to do what is right for us for our own grieving process, because we have to be, like, grief takes place in the heart. So we have to be true to our hearts for that grief to really be able to flow and to be able to pass through us and to change us, because it comes to change us. And so I really wanted to make that very clear, that it's such a personal journey, and I think we need to all feel empowered to follow that journey in the way that feels right to us. And, I even thought there was something wrong with me because I was not experiencing anger. It would come in little snippets, but it just wouldn't really hit me. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought, I even questioned at times, like, gosh, is there something, like, am I a sociopath? Like, what's wrong with me? But there's so many different aspects to grief, and we don't all experience all of them. Or if we get stuck in anger, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or that you aren't spiritual. It's just that part of the grief cycle, and that, all of the different things that we go through, and it's all normal. And this whole thing of, like, humanizing us, and that we all are human, and it's a human condition, and we all experience these things, and to not, like, categorize it as, that's a bad feeling, this is a good feeling, don't stick with the bad. They're all just feelings. And I try to remember for myself, because sometimes it is so incredibly intense that it's like a wave, how they talk about grief being a wave. And I just picture myself in the ocean, and allowing it to wash over me, not fight it, and let it come, and then I'll come back up for air. And I do notice that I stay up for air much more frequently now, and I've got a network of people who help push me up when I can't get up there on my own. So
you talked about breaking that silence. And so one of the things that we do is we have the message about breaking that silence. And so We do have these masks because we've also been in the COVID. So,
Mhm,
you've seen these
mhm,
around too.
mhm,
So the purpose of this is to help break that silence because we've
mhm,
been silent for too long. And so I
mhm.
think you've just opened up many doors and shedding light on the life of your son. So I want to say really appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you so much.
And look forward to visiting someday. I heard you say something about possibly coming back up this way.
I do expect to be back in the future. I have no definite plan. Where my son was found. I was talking to Robin about this last night. To me, that is his grave.
Mm-hmm.
That is where he decomposed and went back into the earth. And I felt that there. I did not expect that. I thought I was going to be kind of visiting a crime scene almost, but what I really felt there was his presence. And so regardless of why specifically I come back, I know that I will be returning in order to visit his grave. And two, I'm so grateful that he was found. I mentioned that I was up recently. I did come up in the month of August to view his remains before he was shipped off, because I knew, I understood that when he was found, so many people said he's coming home, and I was like, no, not quite yet,
Right.
but I understood that process, and it was so important to me. People are like, are you sure you want to do that?
Right.
And my answer was, well, I would much rather regret having done it than regret not doing it when I had the chance.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very healing for me,
Right.
me personally. And in some ways, even to help my brain
Exactly.
understand, there he is, after
Right.
all that time of like, where is he,
Right.
and one time I've likened it like when I've lost my keys, like the first 10 minutes of looking for your keys, you're looking in all the normal places, are they in my purse? Are they on my dresser? And then after you look in all the normal places, you start going like, I'll look in the refrigerator. I'm like, did I leave them in the refrigerator? And the mind gets kind of irrational and starts looking anywhere. So I had been in that state and kind of picturing of what could have happened, all this stuff, that to have tangible evidence of there he is, and not just somebody telling me on the phone, we found him, was very healing for me. And also to I have to say, it's not a work cry, but to say that I feel that you are so incredibly blessed with the coroner that you have. You're such an incredibly beautiful man, so compassionate and loving. That was wonderful. And then to be able to go to his grave and to be able to sit with him and be with him, and to just say, in a different way, you are gone. Okay, I see you are gone now, different than that, being at home and trying to accept it when there's confusion and all of that stuff, and so I feel incredibly lucky that my son was found, and I understand that that is not really even the norm, um, so my heart goes out. I was saying to Robin last night that I can relate to not being able to find a loved one because I was in that. But I mean, I can relate to that part. But I can't relate to never finding a loved one because I've been taken out of that group now. Yeah, or the fact that I got so much attention around my son that for whatever reason, however that worked out, that so many people, like I said, got emotionally involved in this, that I know not everybody experiences that. And I'm so grateful for that. And I know that is not necessarily the norm. I wish it was, I wish as a community, as a culture, as a society, we started caring more about other people and less about ourselves. Would be a really good thing. So
Thank you again, Liz, for
I'm
all of
chatty.
your words. No, for all your words. They're all really helpful, and you show a lot of grace. And thank you so much. If you have a dedication, or if you would like to dedicate this episode to anyone or anything.
Well, I wanted to recognize just, that there were two people traveling in that car. One was John Cleary, who I did know. as well as Josiah. There are two families involved in this, experienced great loss. And then also too to the Yakima people for embracing me and my son's story the way that they have. I don't think people really recognize or always understand the power that these small acts that we do, you know, what that has, and it has really uplifted me, and it's helped. That healing is such a funny word. People say, oh, you're healing now, and it's such a long timeline that it's hard. I suppose that I am, you know, but it has been healing. It helps my healing to not feel ostracized or cast out. So that, and then also to recognize the other missing people, Yakima people that I've been made aware of, you know, and Caroline Looney, and the acts that that her idea of getting this cross made, Rick and Sonia Dominguez, who made the cross, Brad Gowdy, Doris and George Strong, who came to do the blessing. And yeah, just the other people who have reached out to me both publicly and privately, to feel like that when I come up there, when I come to the reservation and when I come to Greater Yakima, I do not feel like I'm coming to a foreign place. I feel like I do have support and a family there. So that it helped, especially this last journey, it helped make that journey that much easier for me, you know, to feel supported there. So
I also forgot to mention that the sign with the reward for Josiah is actually on my in-laws' place. You know, I went out there and I took a moment when we gave our war cry in the last podcast and I thought about you, and you know, continue to think about you in this journey. We would like to give a war cry to Corner Jim, Curtis. We'd also like to give a special thanks and war cry to our guest today, Liz Hilderbrand, a writer, and the mother of Josiah. For credits, this show is edited and produced by Robin Peebushy. Logo by John Olney Schellenberger with Native Anthro. Support from Native Women in Action. Shirts by Nicole Peebushy. My shirt today is by Red Gelia with Yakima Nation Victims Resource. And music by Lee Sikakwaptiwa.